and we will take advantage of our time right now. Welcome everyone to Surviving the IEP Maze, and it truly is a maze for sure. I'm your host, Judy McNamee. I'm a former intervention specialist for many, many years, and now an ADHD coach for the last 3 or 4 years actually. So I'm very, very thrilled to be able to bring this to you. I have learned a lot in my past through being an intervention specialist, writing many, many of these, working with parents, knowing from both sides how complicated and convoluted this can get. Just quickly, a couple resources for you are on this page. Certainly on my own website, there are resources under resources. There are products under products. There's coaching services and what I provide to you personally, to your children, to schools, etc. So I want to be a resource for all of you. If you are on Facebook, I invite you not only to be on my Facebook here, but to like it and to join my Pathway of Hope. I've made this a very live community this year, where I am going to be on there on Mondays when I'm not doing the webinars, and live to you, to your questions. I hop on there quite frequently to answer questions for people. So I want it to be a safe place for you, a place where you can share, and a place where you can get help and support if needed. All of you automatically get a complimentary consult, and if you are seeing the slides, I don't know whether you're audio or not, but you will get these. You can either click on my website or click on this link. The last resource I have for you is what I'm very proud of. It's my little book of hope. It was actually stories written by my clients, my ADHD teens, and it was in the passion of helping, if we could help just one more child to realize they're not alone, they have support, and they can overcome this and empower themselves. So those are just some resources. We'll continue to provide more for you. Moving on, again, there are many reasons that you're here. It could be the maze of documentation. It can be, it's intimidating by, and I hate to use the word bullying, but there are many schools that kind of do that because they want to meet their guidelines federally and get things signed. Finding out if your child's goals are even measurable or if they're being measured correctly is important. Some of you may be new to this process. Welcome. It's a little crazy, but we'll walk you through it. If you're not seeing progress within the school, if you're not communicating with your people, if you're not sure what questions to ask, or you just need more information, I welcome you, no matter what your reasoning. So today what we'll discover is the differences between IEPs and 504s. We will, excuse me, talk about which one would be best for your child. We'll give you some resources for language so that you're all talking the same language when you have that IEP meeting. And we'll look at accommodations versus modifications. And any questions that you have, I've put this in the chat box. Please don't hesitate to type a question. I'm going to try and get through this as efficiently as I can and then respond to your personal questions. Okay, so one thing I'm not, I have to put my disclaimer is, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a parent advocate, although I know many and I refer parents to them. I'm certainly not your district representative. I have no knowledge to know it all because it changes every minute. And I have a disclaimer down there that this is just for informational purposes only. So one of those things I have to put in there. So let's dive into the meat of this. We'll skip over that for a second. Okay, difference between IEP and 504s. IEP is backed by IDEA, the Individual Disability Education Act. An IEP is much more lengthy. It's much more complex. It usually involves students with severe disabilities, if you will, or multiple disabilities. It lays out educational guidelines, and it can be in effect for school children from ages 3 to 21 years of age. So as soon as they hit their 22nd birthday, the IEP is no longer in effect. If you hit the links, you should be seeing where IDEA is a government department. It is the backbone, if you will, behind No Child Left Behind, behind your education rights, and the Privacy Act as well. So there's a lot of information going down here if you wish to certainly go that direction. Let me get back to where we were. Whoops, there's the chat box. Okay, so with that, an IEP, convoluted, you may modify the curriculum with an IEP, and we'll talk about that in a minute. 504 comes from Section 504 of, excuse me, of the Federal Government Act from, I believe, 1973, Rehabilitation Act. So this is also federally funded and supported. In the 504, it is not as convoluted, it is not as complex. You do not modify the curriculum, and you are in the general education classroom. So that's just a general overview of the difference. So let's take a little more specific view of this. Under IEP, again, this is the law that requires the schools to really identify anyone who is struggling with a disability, although it normally comes more from you. That's the reality of it. It is the law that requires that schools to serve the educational needs of students with disabilities. So there's A, B, C, and D, I believe. Part B is usually the area that you're familiar with, where we're working with the educational guidelines. Again, ages 3 through 21. It ensures what we call FAPE, or a free and appropriate public education. So as your child may be in the public education, if there is a disability, if they are struggling, the school is required to identify that and to provide the services within that appropriate public education arena. They need to make sure your child is in the least restrictive environment. That could be a resource room. That could be a pullout from a general classroom. That could be just a general classroom. That could be additional tutoring, etc. The least restrictive. So where is your child most successful, yet gets the support that they need? So your student or your child is entitled to an evaluation in all areas related to that suspected disability. That includes ADHD, which it didn't several years ago. That includes other health impairments that may not be specifically a learning disability, but have a substantial impact on learning and behavior. It could be a concussion from an automobile accident. Again, it is in place from infancy to your 22nd birthday. I apologize, I'm muting myself to control this wonderful illness I've had. An IEP, since it goes to your 22nd birthday, what do we do with our children when they go to college? Well, you want to keep that support in place for as long as you can through high school. You want to keep the accommodations in place. You want to make sure you have the most updated testing or IEP. And when you go to college, it no longer is an IEP. It moves to a 504. And that is because there is no modified instruction. Everybody is in the general classroom. However, in college, your child can receive those accommodations if needed to help them. To get an IEP initially, there are 13 kinds of disabilities, and the child must have one or more of these. Here are our 13. So autism to blindness to deafness, any kind of hearing impairment. There may be learning disabilities, there may be multiple disabilities. Up here where there could be an orthopedic impairment, or here's our ADHD or ADD, other health impairment, speech or language, traumatic brain injury. So these will fall and qualify for an IEP. Now, if you have speech or language impairment, your child may continue to be in the regular classroom, but that in public education is usually a pullout where they go with a speech therapist or a language therapist for 1 or 2 times a week. With other health impairment, and now including ADHD, there are some districts that don't recognize it yet. You have to be the knowledgeable one. So ADHD is a scientifically neurological disorder, even though I don't see it as a disorder. I see it as just a different brain wiring. But the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, this is the Bible of the American Psychological Association, now puts ADHD within that neurological, behavioral, or disorder issue, meaning that whether your child, and this is a key, has very good grades, if they are struggling with executive functions, impulse control, emotional control, they may have very strict thinking, they're not very flexible, they're very black and white, they have trouble holding information in their brain. They don't self-monitor themselves to see, are they learning? Are they disturbing others around them? Planning, organizing, initiating tasks. These are all your executive functions. These are your processes that all of us use and need every single day to get through every single day. Executive functions is becoming a more common word in the schools, but there are still many, many people who don't see it, don't know what it involves, don't understand it thoroughly. So when you have a child who is getting A's and B's in class, a teacher normally would not see that consequence, that result, that behavior as an issue, and therefore they would not target them for any kind of testing. However, one of the big areas, and I didn't write this in, I'm going to attempt to use my and 2E. Twice exceptional. Twice exceptional is your gifted or very, very bright student, but who struggles with one or more executive functions. And they may be put, because of their grades and their IQ, etc., into a gifted program, into an honors program, into an AP program. Yet, you'll see them struggle because they can't plan all the work they have to do. They might not be able to hold that information in their working memory. They are very disorganized. They do not turn in their work, even though they may do it. This 2E is becoming bigger and bigger, and we're finally seeing so many kids struggle with this who have been automatically put into these gifted programs without any type of executive function teachings. As a side note, and this webinar is not totally on executive functions, but executive functions are maturing every day. There are certain growth periods between 7 and 9, and I think 10 and 13 age-wise, where we can really build on executive functions. However, everyone usually has a maturity learning curve into young adulthood. In other words, kids do not mature in their executive functions until they're young adults, and it can be in their 20s or in their 30s. Students who struggle with an ADD or ADHD wiring, it is proof that there is a smaller frontal lobe, so that needs time to mature as well. So you can see where this may be an issue. So really, in general, teachers should be teaching and meshing executive function work within their curriculum. And that's one of the things that I do working with schools, is identifying these and helping them to realize that there's ways to implement these every single day without it being another program. Okay, let's look at a 504. A 504 is going to provide services. It's going to provide accommodations. But as we mentioned, I guess I need to erase this. That is not an eraser. Bear with me one second. Here we go. It allows the student to basically be on a level playing field as everyone else without changing the curriculum, the targets, the core objectives. There's just accommodations to help overcome the weak or challenge areas, but it does not reduce the performance objectives. So if your child has an IEP in the regular classroom, they may be pulled out and have some kind of modified instruction. In other words, they may do a different type, and I'll show you some of these, a different type of performance objective, a different type of test, a different type of expectation. If your child is a 504 and in the regular classroom, there may be accommodations for something like extra time, but they will have the expectations of everyone else, whether they have accommodations or not. So when we look at accommodations, they're often grouped into 5 categories. Timing, so we can extend the time they may need. Flexible scheduling, if there's a long project, long-term project or assignment, we give them 2 days or 5 days instead of 3 days. If there's a way they can make a presentation, perhaps they're not able to stand up and speak in front of the whole classroom, they may do it after class, one-on-one with the teacher. They may do a PowerPoint instead of a speech, so there's some variation in that. We may change the setting and have them do it in a smaller room, a smaller group, as opposed to the large classroom. One of the biggest anxiety triggers for students is taking that test and struggling with executive functions or needing the accommodations of extra time and watching students get up and turn in tests quicker than them. That anxiety shoots to the top. So pulling them into a different setting can be very, very effective. And the response accommodation, if we have a student that doesn't write well, that writes very, very slowly, that is difficult to read their writing or understand, then we may have them accommodate through a scribe. When we modify, again, this would be with an IEP, not a 504, then modifications are very instructional or performance-based. So perhaps they do lesser homework problems. They do the even ones, not all 30. They may allow the student to demonstrate in different ways what he knows or can do. So they reduce that performance to where it puts the child on a level playing field. Some examples of this would be, as I mentioned, fewer homework problems, shorter papers. They may answer different test questions, different types of projects or assignments. They may learn completely different material, but still learning that common core objective. They may get graded a different way. So in the resource room, and as an intervention specialist, I did all of these depending on the student, depending on the accommodation or modification, as we have here, needed, and the disability of the student. But the key is you want to measure learning, and you want to measure learning at that child's best potential, not at a high anxiety rate or anything else. If you have any questions between IEPs and 504s, please type them in and I'll be more than happy to address them. The next piece is just understanding the jargon. So when you're talking with teachers, talking with administrators, talking with special need coordinators, I've given you a lot of these already, but there is also a resource slide at the end of this where I provide for you many resources you can use. So remember, our point of reference with an IEP is IDEA. With the 504, it's section 504. The FAPE is our free and appropriate education. IEP is an individual education program, and it should be specifically individualized for your child. An LRE is our least restrictive environment, and that's where we want your child placed. And our related services would normally just be, it can be on a 504, but normally we see them on a IEP, speech, adapted phys ed, language, whatever that might be. Special education, transition services, you will see these come into play, especially on an IEP, as the child nears the age of beyond 14. At the age of 14 on an IEP, you'll notice there's very little said. However, there's been a huge emphasis on transition services. What are they going to do after middle school or high school? How are they going to prepare themselves? So in high school, on an IEP, a transition might include something along the line of shadowing, visiting a career center, visiting colleges, whatever the student wants to do. So we're preparing them for an easy transition. ETR and MFE, you will hear a lot of on part 2 when I do that, because that's your testing piece. An evaluation test results or a multi-factor evaluation. Those words are interchangeable. They happen every 3 years, and that's the lengthy testing that your child has to have to qualify for an IEP. 504, we can do it off of a diagnosis from a doctor. The IEP team varies. However, that should be the case worker, which is your intervention specialist who prepares the IEP or 504, other teachers, administrator, counselors. If you need additional outside resources, caseworkers, they should be involved. So the entire team. I'm part of an IEP team for a couple kids as the ADHD coach, parent advocates. So all those people are part and make decisions as an IEP team. And you as a parent are a key piece. The BIP is a behavioral intervention plan that often has to be put in before there are other types of plans put in place. So if we want to make changes in the IEP, many times districts will require that behavior intervention plan to be put in place first. And you can Google that and they'll pull up some different samples of that. We'll talk again more about that in section 2. That is what I have for today. It is the introduction between and knowing the difference between IEPs, 504s, what the support is, how you qualify for them. This will all be recorded. You are all registered for the second piece, which right now, because I've had to cancel a few meetings due to my illness, I'm looking at probably February 27th, and I may do part 2 and 3 together. Part 2 is pretty long though, but that's the actual process that you will get on the webinar, which is very important. How to get through that process, how to start that process, how long will it take, what's your responsibility, what's the responsibility of the school, etc. And then the last piece is how to approach that IEP meeting, how to be prepared as a parent, how to collaborate with the school, etc. So all of you have a one-on-one phone call consult coming to you, and you can click here or you can go into my website. If you have any questions whatsoever, I am free to answer them right now. We still have a few minutes. And here's the page of the resources. So after today, I will send out the recording, which should include the slides as well. Hopefully it does. Since this is my first time using this Zoom technology. I'm still looking to some other things as well, but there's a whole pile of resources here for you, as well as to access me. So if you want to hop on my Facebook page, hop on, as I mentioned, the Pathway to Hope. I will respond to those questions, and I will actually be live most every Monday for a half an hour from noon to 12:30, the same time, to answer questions. So any questions from all of you out there? I appreciate you joining me today, and I'm glad the directions worked. I'm looking forward to bringing more to you. If you have children in the schools and you are looking at hopefully working with the schools, if you feel they need or are interested in any kind of district training, that I am available for. I'm just finishing up training with the school in Northeast Ohio, and we've done a lot of work there for the last 4 or 5 months. So that is one of the things I do. But I love that you joined me. I don't see any questions up here. So with that being said, I'm still, as I mentioned, looking. So pay attention if you can to the inbox day of and day before for the instructions, because I may be working from a different platform that gives us a little bit more to work with. Thank you all so very much. And I hope to see you on the next one, and you should get this recording within the next 24 hours.